Heroes, Shell Invaders,
Massey Trinidad All-Stars,
First Citizens Supernovas,
and the pride of the South, Fun Clear, plus their talented youth bands. Saturday, July 11th
at the iconic Grandstand, Queens Park, Savannah.
Showtime, 6 p.m. till 10:30 p.m.
All performing their most exciting and multifaceted repertoire. Coolers allowed.
Early bird tickets.
2 persons on 1 ticket for only $350.
The quadrophonic tickets admits 4 persons for only $600.
The single pan tickets cost only $200.
By public demand, early bird tickets remain till Saturday, 4th July.
Additional $10 off for online purchases.
Children 12 and under, accompanied by an adult. Admission is free. Get yours now. Available at ICNTT.com.
At Crosby St. James.
All Kenny Sports.
All Extra Foods Supermarket.
Westby, Tagarigua, Athletes by the Park.
Jumbo Foods, Barataria.
GAC Electrical, opposite Starlight. Tigger Martin, Main Road. Tarp Office, Belmont. Mirage Westside Supermarket. Arima. Anderson Fashion, opposite Citygate. Western Union, Tuna Puna, and all participating bands. Presented by Super Pan Man, Dane Gulston and Friends.
Supported by CCNTV6, The Express Newspaper, and I-95.5 FM.
For more info, call 732-3402.
Maybe he landed here totally by coincidence. But if by chance he's admiring your fresh coat of Benjamin Moore soft sky blue, well, that's a pretty high compliment. Coming from an expert.
WESN.
Good morning. Sean Small here. This is Talking Point at WSN, the content capital. And it is a beautiful, warm morning where the world must go on. And I think one of the blind spots of us humans is to be so caught up with what is the big thing. We forget that little things could happen all the while. We forget that there are other issues that still exist, still persist, that the normal day-to-day boring stuff that are still challenges to our everyday life still continues. Now I guess it all depends on how we perceive these things. I find it interesting that if you take one example is with regards to migrants, one advocate is saying that it's unfair because of the delays, which I find it's interesting because at some point now I have to take a step back and compare and contrast my perceptions of this administration with the past. That matters because, again, I am technically here as part of my job to give commentary, to give an opinion, and I would like to do it fairly, which means that I can't just have arbitrary standards. So I have to ensure that there's some sort of consistency. And then if I find that there isn't a consistency, I have to deconflict the difference. Because perhaps maybe for various reasons, I perceive something to be not so bad here, but then for whatever reason now I find it's really bad. Well, why? Or the reverse could happen. Why am I more forgiving now of something than I was then? Why? Because of course there could be wider context to each situation, but it's also to some extent based on our own individual perceptions and our priorities, and perhaps we got it wrong the first time. Perhaps we are getting it wrong now. So, one of the issues, you probably get this with or in every country, is a mistrust of the process. The trusty process is now one of those phrases that's slowly turning into, dare I say, something just shy of a cuss out or a negative slogan of despair. Trust the process, but it will be, instead of saying it with a certain amount of genuine faith, it would be a statement rather of ironic exasperation. You know, they say trust the process, ha 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 ha. And because of that mistrust, which exists even when a government is doing well, there will still be some current of mistrust. We look at negative things and we perceive them to be not just mistakes or not just human error, but some sort of devious or deviant behavior. And we start to use stronger and stronger language. It varies. So with regards to the migrants, saying it's unfair for those who have already complied with the law that there are delays in processing applications for migrancy and residency. Now, the Minister of Homeland Security, who ironically, I'm not entirely sure if this is technically part of his purview, because if it is, why do we have a Minister of Defense? But I guess with regards to immigration, this is very strange. One would think, why do we have a Minister of Defense at this point? I know why. We need another senior minister portfolio. The delays are due to illegal migrants, right? In that they're looking to potentially obfuscate the exercise. And the activists saying it makes no sense. Migrants who had already registered should not be penalized because others entered the country illegally, right? And I think this is the case where the minister is not doing a very good job of explaining himself, because the implication is he's trying to say the illegals are attempting to abuse the offer to register. And it was not necessarily intended for new illegals who we know nothing about. Because at least you could say those migrants or illegal immigrants that have been here for quite some time at least have some kind of track record, right? So one would imagine certain decisions would be made potentially on behalf of them. Advocates would be making arguments potentially on behalf of them. You can't necessarily make any sort of consistent argument with migrants who are randomly arriving, or rather, who are from random backgrounds we don't know, and they are fresh off the boat. So there's no sort of interaction, no sort of track record to even be implied. Which, to be honest, I'm not entirely sure if I agree with the minister. I might agree with the activists as well, if we go early on. If other migrants are coming in, what does that have to do with the migrants who are already here, who went through the process of applying online and attending the appointments they were given? One has absolutely nothing to do with the other. Now, the problem is, well, she goes on to say, if they're incapable of doing the job, that's another story. But if new migrants are coming in by sea, then do what you have to do as the authority. Of course, that could be a double-edged sword, that statement. But at what point now are we going to say, because she's saying it's unfair, then when will unfair turn into mean, cruel? Then when will mean and cruel turn into unethical? Because think about it. To say that the current government is unfair, I'm sure there are a lot of UNC supporters who don't necessarily want to hear something like that. And it all comes back down to perception. How do you judge government behavior? Because she's right. She's essentially saying, if they're incapable of doing the job, that's another story. AKA never attribute to malice what could be attributed to incompetence. And just because you elect new public officials in high office doesn't mean that the bureaucracy all of a sudden gets automatically more efficient. Now, I have been told that for certain offices, they have swapped out the personnel wholesale, and in some cases, it has had a positive effect. Now, the positive effect could be because you have new people who don't have a sense of entitlement to the positions that they're in, because they literally know they're replacing somebody who was removed. So, regardless of the socio-economic, racial, geographical, demographic of the replacements and how different they are to those they replaced, there is something of a motivating factor of, I got this job because they sacked my predecessor. I ain't gonna fool around, at least for the while. But at the end of the day, government bureaucracy is government bureaucracy. Is it incompetence? And then, of course, when you say that, oh, how you can say that the government is incompetent, da 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 da. No offense, but the minister did a hell of a job explaining himself. It was so thorough that the counter arguments had to try to cover all the bases because they couldn't have been sure. So it comes down to perception. At what point will we stop giving the benefit of the doubt? At what point will human emotion take over, frustrations will take over, and then it won't just be something that we could tolerate, forgive, and wait patiently for? And I fear what's happening, it's difficult necessarily to fully understand with accuracy what's going on, because you can't necessarily compare the PNM to the UNC. It's apples and oranges at some point, right? The motivating factors are different, the personalities are different, the external circumstances are different. Even to some degree, the psychological demands or effects on the population are different, right? What we're feeling in a given moment can be different. And that, again, that's not rooted in reason, logic, or consistency. It's not fair. It is what it is. To some extent, what separates true leaders from wannabes is the inherent, intrinsic, or instinctual understanding of human psychology and the capacity to generate or to secure trust rather than being confused as to why it is not automatically given. And such individuals are rare. It's not as though either party has them in spades. And once you get onto that level, to operate with such leadership abilities, but on a national level, that is even rarer. It's rare enough for an organization of 40 people to have one. It's even rarer for a country to be led by one. But I find that it is easier to find harsher criticism and deeper speculation with regards to what some people perceive as nefarious agendas. Now, is it a product? Because I did not necessarily fully disagree with Karen and her stance with regards to the government's, well, if we take them at surface level, which to some extent Karen is, knowing that there's no guarantees that it's going to be all that they say it is, but she's still willing to take them at their word to a point. So if we do that, trying to affect the status quo in the manner that they are with regards to white-collar crime is going to make waves. So the question is, are the waves the natural turbulence that you're going to get of a system that is trying to defend itself, a system of corruption? Or is it legitimate concerns by citizens seeing potential overreach, seeing potential precedents being set that will shift the goalposts in a negative direction? And then, of course, put us in a position where we all might be slowly but surely under more and more threat for mistreatment by the very authorities that are supposed to be protecting us. And it's hard to know because, again, everybody will present their version of the truth. And a lack of transparency by the government makes it easier for various versions of the truth to be out there. To some extent, you can ask the question, why is the PDOs for white-collar crime essentially limited to these three? And it's not exactly for white-collar crime, it's for threats against the government. Now, you could maybe say, well, it's hard to get them for any sort of economic, any sort of financial situation. It's hard to get them on the drugs because there's levels of protection and isolation. So this could be like an Al Capone situation. Well, we'll get them for tax evasion. Or in this case, we'll get the ones that might be involved in something beyond the norm, and we'll go after them for that. I just find it very strange. Why go after these three in particular? I am fairly certain, whether it's white-collar, financial crimes, drugs, some other grand conspiracy, you can't tell me, oh, these three individuals, a man, his wife, and his aunt, are the full extent of the criminal masterminds in this country at that level. One would think if you have such deep intelligence on them, you have intelligence on other people. Now the question is, why did you, I don't know, jump the gun on these but not those? And this is all speculation on my part, but unfortunately, I have questions. It doesn't make much sense to me. And I have seen other people speculate further along these lines. And it's even more critical on the government. It's even more negative commentary. It's even more extreme, I guess you could say, in the speculation, but it's not quite that extreme, because it's still technically within the realm of plausibility. And I've seen these things online, and I didn't necessarily see things go quite this far under the PNM. You saw similar concerns about a dictatorship, about financiers corrupting the system, you know, about the 1% and their hold over the economy and the country and the blah, 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 and whatever the connection is to the economy and to drugs, etc., etc. You got this on the PNM, but it was a bit different. So now the question is the difference because of something the government did? The perception of how things are going with the country? Is it just bias against the UNC? Is it a racial thing? Is it because the speakers are not quite the same? Maybe a lot of the criticisms on the PNM were under one demographic, and now the criticisms on the UNC is under a different demographic, and that will explain the differences in commentary, because it's not actually the same people speaking. I don't know. I am me, so I know that at least in one case, and for the most part in the mainstream media, it's the same media professionals. Can't say political analysts. Some political analysts are quite silent these days. Funny that, to be fair, they were silent ones when the PNM were in power. So you already see the potentials for certain agendas by various stakeholders, speakers, commentators, analysts, opinion makers, thought leaders. And then you also have to go with, what about the media houses themselves? So all I could do is then come back to myself, what is consistent for me? And as I said before, I was never comfortable criticizing the PNM because it reached the point where there was nothing positive to say towards the end. It was hard to find anything positive to say. I struggled to find anything positive to say. And even when I do find something positive to say that I want to then say, listen, whatever you did there, do more of that. Don't do this other thing. Don't talk like that. Whatever you did here, do more of that. This was good. This showed maturity. This showed leadership. And I still, when I can, throw those comments out there to whichever politician gives me a good example of reasonable behavior, leadership, maturity in both their behavior but also in their speech and the content that they offer to the public. But I was never comfortable because there was so much negative criticism. And I find myself in just about the same situation now. Listen, you could go back, you could check the recordings, right? All of the past episodes on Talking Point should be on our social media, Facebook, YouTube page. If you want, you could go back, find my commentary in the first couple of months of the government, find my commentary with regards to the Prime Minister's statement after their first cabinet meeting, that first post-cabinet press conference, which was at the Red House, I believe, when she said she would find the money. And I would argue that I was quite supportive back then because I saw a genuine emotional reaction from the Prime Minister back then. And I felt as though here she is giving us this is at least in this moment, she's giving us to some extent the truth. And she's allowing her emotions to show what kind of a struggle it's going to be. And I have not seen that person since. I mean, the joke, of course, would be we barely see the Prime Minister, and apparently she's going off to some other international summit or what have you, as opposed to, I don't know, being present to lead us here. This could be a byproduct of electing someone at her age. We saw what happened to Biden, right? I mean, I myself have speculated that Dr. Keith Rowley's health might not have been as good as we were led to believe. Not that he's in any danger, but he's over 70. He's nearing 80 at some point. I can't remember how old exactly he is. And the rigors of a job like that, Prime Minister, is not something to just give to any and everybody for the faint of heart, right? My job was a concern to my cardiologist. For me, I ain't 70. And I ain't Prime Minister. So I don't know if part of the issue is the commentary is allowed to maybe get more out of hand than before because we don't have any sort of pushback or defense, really, from the government. Any attempt to speak to certain aspects of the undercurrents of what people are feeling and even saying, but I fear it is more feeling, and the reason why it's a fear is because it's not then being discussed, and because it's not being discussed, it's not necessarily going to be fully analyzed, it's going to be bottled up, it's going to build, it's going to boil over, it's going to explode, and it's going to come across as extreme hatred because of whatever political bias as opposed to extreme frustration. It's not going to be addressed. And some of it is going to be unreasonable because it's not going to be ventilated, so you're not going to go through the exercise of, consulting with people, what about this, what about that? We're stuck in our beliefs, and the beliefs are going to be negative, and the negativity is going to grow. Right now, I believe, let me find the report. I think it's Minister Saddam Hussein is speaking to let me see if I can find it. There we go. The minister said terrorism has evolved into an increasingly fluid concept requiring countries around the world to adapt their legislation to capture the broadest possible definition. I'm not entirely sure if that's necessary. The definition is not that narrow, in certain ways at least. Quote, it has morphed into revolutions, to physical bombings, mass killings, now weaponizing technology as a form of terrorism. I do wonder if that is more a statement with regards to what is happening here, and to what extent is what is happening here terrorism. It continues to evolve across borders, exploiting technological innovation, transnational criminal networks, online platforms, and increasingly sophisticated financing mechanisms. These developments underscore fundamental reality. Geographically, TNT is a dot in the world. Putting it in perspective, the land size of Trinidad can fit 2,000 times in America. But this teaches us one thing: we are not too big or we are not too small for a threat. We must always be vigilant and ready. Now, dare I say, the attempt to say that the definition of terrorism must be broader, and I think is a mistake. And it will only potentially, if applied domestically here, will probably only continue fueling whatever direction we are accelerating towards. I suspect for at least some of the public, it will be viewed similarly as the state of emergency, as the preventative detention orders. And however, they may be expanded if we do not have some degree of transparency, accountability, but also consistency. And saying that you need to expand the definition of terrorism. Because I would just like to know, is the technological innovation exploitation he's talking about hacking state computer networks in order to ransom digital infrastructure? Because technically that's not terrorism. Is it hacking state digital infrastructure in order to steal information, to target individuals? That might be precursors to terrorism. Is it just the destruction of state digital networks via viruses and the like for no financial motivation? That could be terrorism. Harming a population. Although technically it would still need political motivation in order for it to not just be mischief. Now, the Chief Secretary said, whoever vandalized WASA's equipment in Tobago causing water shortages or contributing to a water shortage situation across the island a few months ago, that might have been, or potentially, terrorism. But that doesn't mean that it's guaranteed to be. And I think it's the same thing here. Because given the government's commentary, if someone technically says anything to threaten a member of parliament or any other government official, this includes the opposition. This includes the opposition if the UNC was in opposition, right? But obviously the UNC is in government. This obviously includes the Prime Minister. I am consistent with what I've said on this issue. You should not just let that pass. You should intervene. There should be consequences for that kind of thing, particularly if it's a public message, right? Now, of course, the question is, if you have a private message and you're just making jokes, to what extent should the government, if they have that capacity, be entitled to do anything about that? But if there's a public message, and that's why, similarly, with regards to Mr. Samru, I don't have an issue with the authorities wanting to confront him about what he said. I do find it somewhat ridiculous, though, how he's being treated overall. I'm not entirely sure if, and it probably depends on the judge. Right now, apparently, he's out on $100,000 station bail. I think this is ridiculous because, again, the man saw a video of his son being shot by police. You might disagree with this statement all you want. I'm not saying that this is the truth. I'm not saying this is what I 100% believe. I'm saying this is what some people will believe. Because we already have activists who believe things along these lines. People are going to look at this and say, you're victimizing this man after you killed his son. Not after his son was killed in a police shooting. What people are saying or are going to say is, you're victimizing this man after you killed his son. It doesn't matter if it's factually incorrect, at least in your version of events. It could be literally factually incorrect. It doesn't matter. People are going to perceive this more as overreach by law enforcement. And potentially they're going to tie it to the government, which is maybe the irony of ironies. The government is going to get flack for things that they might not have technically even desired, wanted, ordered, or instructed. And then when you combine that with the implications of what Minister Hussain said, Minister Hussain, with regards to expanding what is believed to be terrorism, will it expand into criticisms of the government? Because we already start to see the justification with regards to the SOE, and they changed the wording compared to what the PNM, well, when the PNM had it, it was a big issue, right? Anything that would destabilize us, I can't remember what the specifics are. But the whole situation with threats to public safety or public order, and we put that in there, and then all of a sudden we say, well, social media posts are threats to public order. You know, certain commentary is threats to public order. Because I've seen some people put out some videos on some stuff, speculating on what is the agenda to go after one party's finances, to prop up their finances, all kind of things that technically there's no actual evidence to lend credence to the argument. But I'm willing to say that much on air because I know people are already speculating about that. That is the nature of the beast. We don't actually want to be involved, but we love to macro and we love to have an opinion and we love to think that we know more than everybody else. So then we'll have these extreme opinions that are, oh my gosh, how could you think that? And look how smart I am. And that's just the nature of our society, that's our culture. And to what extent now are we going to have a government that might put things in place to literally start to outlaw some of the bacchanalism, made up a word, that you find within the population, which is rich given the fact that our parliament literally is that back and forth. And then it goes back to what I said. And I saw somebody put something on social media, whether it's a video or a post, to this effect after I basically gave a warning, right? Warning to who? Warning for what? Just in that, if things like this are directed at one's political opponents, that would be bad for our nation. And then somebody put up something about maybe certain aspects of the opposition might be looked into, certain buildings would be next. I don't know about you, but any building that's going to take, I don't know how many years, and it's still not finished, I kind of have a hard time thinking that it's drug money being laundered in that operation. That's a very sad way to use illegal money. Usually, the sign of illegal money is when you just see a project just all of a sudden appear out of nowhere, because they just needed to offload the money as quickly as possible for whatever reason they think that's a good idea. You see, what makes it difficult is, right now everybody has a feeling, and we are feeling things in various degrees, in different ways. We're not quite perceiving it quite the same. And it's not necessarily something that is directly obvious because it's being said in no uncertain terms, you know, it's being laid out for us. Now, on some level, this is what people did with the PNM. They analyzed things and speculated, came to their own conclusions, and I'm sure a lot of members of the PNM didn't necessarily like it. And perhaps part of it is, and I've tried to explain this before, and I don't know if people fully understand what I'm saying. The country had a certain level of lack of trust, suspicion, jadedness coming out of the last administration. It's basically, if you're abused, you're not just going to trust the next person 100% so easily. Or say you're a child, you were abandoned by your parents, you've been living on the streets, somebody says they're going to adopt you. It's not going to be an automatic parent-child relationship as if it's normal. So a new government comes in, we're going to fix it, we'll find the money, everybody will win. Even for the people who voted for the UNC, it's not going to be just, and we flip the switch. I say we, I'm not saying that I voted or didn't vote for the UNC. So, but we flipped the switch, right? I mean, if I flipped a switch in the sense of, all right, the election's over, the exercise is done, let's move forward, brand new day, hoping for a brand new day. And what do we get? The similarities are stark, they're alarming, in the sense of, in some aspects, we got more of the same. In some aspects, of course, the details are different, so the dynamics are not the same in all respects, they are different. But the point is, the starting point of the population was not, well, we're happy-go-lucky, everything's fine, and you have a buffer by which you could make mistakes before we start to get concerned. I mean, on some level, I believe, we said it on Talking Point, I don't know if the opposition, UNC said at the time, but the population felt abused by the previous administration and by some of the ways they brought their message across, with the aggression, with the over-defensiveness, utilizing essentially bullying tactics in order to get negative questions or to try to head off difficult questions being asked by the media, to distract or maybe even gaslight from certain topics. So on some level, you could argue the country felt psychologically abused by the whole situation. But this is different now. There's a certain level of aggression in this that we in our post-abuse recovery state, I don't know if we were ready for. Now, I don't know if some of it is because of the economy and the government feels they need to accelerate certain things, but they are not operating, even with a lack of information. I suspect you could pull enough clues to say they are not operating with a level of consistency that will give you confidence to say, well, all right, they're treating things fairly, so we should trust them. But rather, like their predecessors, we're seeing inconsistencies with decisions, inconsistencies with outcomes, and we're perceiving inconsistencies in motivations and agendas. So now, I said this, I think, Tuesday. We have a state of emergency. Are we going to be governed by a state of emergency? And is the state of emergency now going to be the tool by which this government will solve all of its problems? And I guess now we have to wait and see. To what extent are they going to go after social media commentary? To what extent are they going to go after the media? When there was an investigation into reporters at the Express, that was a big controversy and a shock. Are we going to get something like that again? Don't say never. Don't say impossible. Don't say it can't happen. And yes, I know what it means in my position to bring that question up. That if I'm right, I'm essentially saying that I myself might be within the crosshairs. But here's the thing. My opinion is not necessarily going to change what actually is going to happen. Whether I believe it can be or not, what will be will be. I must be willing to acknowledge the possibility. Is it likely? Is it unlikely? Well, I'm not sure. In most days, I think it would be unlikely. The proof is in the fact that we have not been victimized. We had that one incident with that one media house, that one newspaper. But this is Trinidad and Tobago. This is not a real place. We've seen a lot of interesting things happen, a lot of interesting things be done by sitting politicians. I mean, one politician professed his love for his wife, and his proof was that he was leaving his mistress. That was the proof that he loved his wife, and he said this publicly. I don't know about you, but I am not accustomed to anybody doing that publicly, much less a public figure. Although I guess I don't think I'm not entirely sure if he still has a seat. But when you juxtapose the fact that, or what makes it difficult to trust in the system, trust the process, trust in what certain speakers or representatives of the government are saying, it's because there's also examples of, do you know what you're doing? The activists with regards to immigration, that's more or less what her question was. Do you know what you're doing with regards to the delays in this process which you started, or the government started? Or is it that you're inept? And you doesn't necessarily mean the minister himself. It could mean whoever's managing the process, whoever's implementing the process, the people actually doing the grunt work, whatever. Could be the leadership decisions are causing the work to become more complicated and difficult than it has to be. There's a whole host when you're dealing with large-scale entities of where things go off the rails, right? We unfortunately don't promote via merit. We don't know how. There's way too many agendas with regards to public jobs, and it gets rather messy at the end of the day in most cases. Now, again, maybe somebody thought in government, oh, well-meaning, we're going to untangle this mess, not realizing it's borderline, potentially unethical, certain stratagems, if you're using them, to untangle certain messes. Or in some cases where certain entities, we know that wholesale swaps have happened. To what extent could you call that ethical, right? To what extent do we accept it's we time? To what extent do we accept what I would argue to be publicly discussed, admitted examples of potential corruption? So these things are happening. Then it's difficult to say, oh, well, I'm going to trust the same people who potentially are inept or potentially are showing their political corruption. We just choose to ignore it, but they are potentially showing it to us as blatantly as any AV drilling scandal, or even more blatantly, to be honest, than AV drilling in certain respects. They're showing it to us, potentially. We might choose to ignore it, but how then could we trust that same crop of politicians, similar under the PNM, to treat crime ethically, responsibly? And that's the issue. It's not that I think the Hadids are innocent or guilty. It's that I have run into a wall where I have a hard time fully believing anything the criminal justice system and the government has to say, because they have done there whether intentional or unintentional, best to undermine the very public trust in themselves. I can't just manufacture it in thin air just because the lack of trust that you created is now inconvenient to the moment. So I understand what Karen said yesterday, but I had a hard time accepting it personally, because the questions I have with regards to the decision making or lack thereof by the people in charge, the ethics or lack thereof by the people in charge, the capacity or capability or lack thereof by the people in charge. I have a hard time because I don't know what the answers to all of those questions are. I don't know to what extent they're treating us properly, in good faith, they're acting in our best interests, and to what extent they have their agendas, or to what extent they just don't know any better. So they are well-intentioned. They're just not that capable. They're not as capable as they think. And listen, no one ever accused most politicians of being skilled. I'm not saying, if I say that I am questioning the government's capacity with regards to their skills, I already did that with the PNM. I'm not saying all of a sudden now the PNM are the most skilled politicians on the planet. I already did that with members of the PNM under their administration. Don't forget that. I have a hard time trusting the process. We come back to that now, because it's going to turn into slang for mistrust, slang for disappointment, slang for frustration. And what frightens me is not necessarily what's going on now. It's the fact that we had a situation that we didn't like. We had a situation that was not good enough to deal with the challenges the world was throwing at us. We opted into a new situation. While more challenges are being thrown at us, the new situation is potentially no better. But because we have essentially made significant changes for little to no gain, the fabric of a society is starting to fray more, because we're expending effort. All of this is effort now, right? Let's just put it simply and take emotion out of it. Changing governments. Governments having different plans, priorities, agendas. Whether they're good, bad is irrelevant now for this part of the discussion. All of this takes effort. Social will, societal will, not just political will. Effort is spent in terms of money, yes. Political capital, trust in the system, not just any politicians. Patience and tolerance by the public. How long will we wait to see results, etc., etc. All of this we're spending effort on. We're not necessarily seeing improvements, and in some aspects we're seeing things get worse. And in 4 years, we're going to have to go through this whole exercise all over again. And we're not showing signs of improving. Now we're beyond the politicians. Now we're looking at wider society. We're not showing signs of learning from our mistakes. We're not showing signs of wanting to improve. We're not showing signs of trying to put any effort to figure out what can we do differently to try to get a new result, whatever it may be. Because a lot of people love to throw out Albert Einstein's definition of insanity to justify whatever ideology they have, right? But we conveniently forget the basic premise of it when it suits us. Because we've had 60 years of ketchup, and for a good chunk of that, mustard. At least 30 years of mustard, right? What have we actually seen to say, it's fine? The process that we have is fine. How we engage in the process is fine. How we participate in the process is fine. How we operate within our democracy is fine, because look at all of the great results. Because dare I say, whenever any politician achieved anything, it usually was when the treasury was loaded with money and they just spent it, and they successfully pulled the wool over your eyes and fooled you. They made you think that it was good leadership. It wasn't good leadership. It was resource extraction and the wealth that automatically comes with it. And now we're at a point where the resource extraction is dried up. But we no longer know what good leadership is. Good leadership is not just slogans. Good leadership is not just making hard decisions and then you have to accept it. Good leadership is making hard decisions that are fair. Good leadership is making hard decisions that does not only benefit my side. Good leadership is making sacrifices to oneself when necessary, not accepting the unethical salary increases and saying nothing about it once we get into power and start to benefit. But on some level, it's not the UNC's fault. Because at the end of the day, the relationship between citizens and government, yes, government are the leaders, but the government is not the employers. So let's put it a different way now. Citizens are shareholders, and we could elect a CEO to lead the company, and they have the power to lead the company. But the CEO might not necessarily be any greater of a shareholder than us. The CEO might not necessarily, in a publicly traded company, have such control over a shareholders meeting. They don't have to, right? But they're hired. Hired by some entity or some process, either representing or done by ownership. That's us. That's us. And no one is going to own a majority of Trinidad and Tobago. We're all going to have an equal stake. And that comes with a responsibility. And we are too comfortable ignoring that responsibility, pushing it on other people, and then complaining when it doesn't work out. And I fear that in 4 years, we're going to basically see something similar to what we're seeing now. Maybe we swap the colors, maybe we don't. I don't think it matters. And we're going to get a lot of people wanting to say, I know the truth, and corruption here, this finance here, there, the PNM this, the UNC that. That's nice. I applaud you for your great discernment. Except people have been saying those things for years, decades, right? We've been saying these things for decades. What have we actually done about it meaningfully? We participate in our political process the exact same way, expecting different results. We're insane, according to Einstein. Has to be. The problem is, and this is what the government doesn't appreciate, if you wait for confirmation for government abusing things like emergency powers, abusing the law, utilizing the judicial process, the criminal justice process to go after its critics and its political opponents, if you wait to see those things happen, if you wait for definitive proof that those things can happen because they are happening, generally speaking, it's kind of late. And the harm that it does to your country, even if you have the capacity to fix it, that kind of harm is not something that you want to see happen, because the recovery is going to be a hell of a thing. Now, maybe it is part of the process of us sinking lower. Because that was one of the things that I wondered. It's going to have to get worse before it gets better, because we won't learn our lesson. We need the hurricane to hit. We need the landslides to happen, the earthquake, the flooding, before we do things like not build on floodplains, before we be more responsible how we build on mountainsides. We need the tragedy to strike. I mean, it's human behavior. It's not necessarily unique to Trinis. But why is it that we have to put the fork or the knife into the electric socket, not listen? We have to test it out for ourselves anyway, like little children, to get shocked. And then we will learn the lesson, right? But I don't know to what extent could a country as young as ours go through that process. I get it. We are complacent. We need worse consequences to move more of us, because 51% of the voting population, I think in hindsight, I'm not going to say that I knew this going into the election and I said this the night after the election. In hindsight, that 54% voter turnout, I think more and more seems like a really bad sign. A really bad sign that our political process was far from healthy, and we're potentially seeing some of the consequences of that. But I don't know if I want to see us have to get worse in order to get better. Why? So at what point are we going to be serious about life? And it's not about who's innocent or who's guilty. But certain things, certain standards, like innocent until proven guilty, right? When I try to speak about those things, everyone is so concerned with the immediate issue in front of their face. Oh, but the criminals, why are you defending criminals? Listen, now we see an SOE used after someone we don't even know. Well, okay, apparently it's conspiracy to murder the prime minister. Right, okay. I definitely see it, right? Look at all the tattoos on his face. Granted, that's a stereotype. But the point is, now we're at a path where we were already on shaky ground. And now we're in a situation where it's like, well, trust us, but we're on shaky ground. You're not accounting for that. And if we wait until we see evidence of it being good or bad, it might be too late. So then what do we do? And I think that's one of the things that the government does not appreciate. Can a population afford to have infinite patience? That we will only act upon something if we see it happening. That's like saying, well, we only worry about child abuse when we see child abuse. And we're not going to put anything in place to deal with child abuse. We're only going to worry about crime after the crime happens. Forget all these social programs and proper economic planning and a proper education system in order to try to prevent people from joining a gang. We're only going to deal with gangs after they join. That's philosophically how we're operating as a country. We're waiting for the problem to exist, and then we want to react to it. That's why people say we're reactionary. But are you willing to wait for government to overreach, to abuse emergency powers? And I'm not saying that that's on the agenda. But first of all, things like that can happen unintentionally, to be honest. But more importantly, at what point do you say it doesn't matter who you are? There's a certain level of trust that we just can't afford to blindly give. Because on some level, I think we got there with the PNM as well. We got there when they had search warrants on a media house's, member of a media house's electronic devices. We got there with regards to the meritless. We got there with regards to Brent Thomas. We got there with regards to the DPP when they tried to dictate what building he was going to go in. When he said no. We got there when they got to the Auditor General, when they wanted to take the matter all the way to the Privy Council. But the matter was so bad inherently, it was so inherently bad, they didn't just lose. They got slapped back down to reality by the members of the Privy Council. Their case was that weak. The arrogance was that high. And I imagine the population was not necessarily willing to say, well, let's wait and see what the PNM are going to do further. How bad is it going to get before we do anything? But we don't have an election coming within the next year to give us the opportunity to show the litmus test of where we are and how we feel. Now, maybe the local government might be an indication. I don't know. Because we don't even necessarily fully understand what our government is supposed to be for us, how it's supposed to operate for us. We want MPs to do things that they're not supposed to be doing. We allow them to do things that they're not supposed to be doing. And then they don't actually do the thing that they are supposed to be doing. And we tolerate that. Because what's the point of being member of parliament for, say, Digicel Central or Siparia or Mayaro if you're not representing the will of the people in that constituency? You're representing your party line. And we've allowed our political process to be derailed by pettiness. Because that's what it is. It's small-minded schoolyard, you're either with me or against me. That's what it is. At the end of the day. And what's the proof? Sean, how could you say that our politicians are small-minded schoolyard petty people? Just look at parliamentary debates. Exhibit A, ad nauseum to infinity. Take your pick. Look at wherever. Just because you like one side doesn't mean the other side is the only ones talking a pack of nonsense. Because the behavior seemingly is universal. All right. Been going on for quite some time. Quick break. Let's just take a quick break because I think I should in terms of timing. I'll come back. I want to get into what, to some extent, this situation or what might be brewing or some of the implications of the top story for the morning. Stay tuned. We'll be right back after this.
Get ready for Generations of Steel, the sweetest pan show bar none.
Featuring Desperados,
Shell Invaders,
Massey Trinidad All-Stars,
First Citizen Supernovas,
and the pride of the South, Fun Clear. Plus their talented youth bands. Saturday, July 11th.
at the iconic Grandstand, Queen's Park, Savannah.
Showtime, 6 p.m. till 10:30 p.m.
All performing their most exciting and multifaceted repertoire. Coolers allowed.
Early bird tickets.
2 persons on 1 ticket for only $350.
The quadraphonic tickets admits 4 persons for only $600.
The single pan tickets cost only $200.
By public demand, early bird tickets remain till Saturday, 4th July.
Additional $10 off for online purchases.
Children 12 and under, accompanied by an adult. Admission is free. Get yours now. Available at ICNTT.com.
At Crosby St. James.
All Kenny Sports.
All Extra Foods Supermarket.
Westby, Tagarigua, Athletes by the Park.
Jumbo Foods Barataria.
GAC Electrical, opposite Starlight. Digicel Main Road. Tarp Office, Belmont. Mirage Westside Supermarket. Arima. Anderson Fashion, opposite Citygate. Western Union, Tunapuna, and all participating bands. Presented by Super Pan Man, Dane Gulston and Friends.
Supported by CCNTV 6, The Express Newspaper, and I-95.5 FM.
For more info, call 732-3402.
Maybe he landed here totally by coincidence. But if by chance he's admiring your fresh coat of Benjamin Moore soft sky blue, well, that's a pretty high compliment. Coming from an expert.
common presentation are menstrual disturbances, so prolonged and heavy and often very painful periods. So rather than a fairly normal 5-6 day menstrual cycle period, they might get incredibly heavy bleeding for 2, 3, 4, 5 days, and it might be prolonged to 7. This bleeding month on month on month can then lead to a drop in the hemoglobin levels and anemia, which can be very tiring. They can also be very painful. Some women will bleed constantly and not have a cycle at all. They'll bleed for 30 days, 40, 50, 60 days.
All right, we'll try to be quick, open the phone lines in a few minutes, but of course there's the situation with regards to the Hadids. They are requesting a hearing before the state of emergency trial. Essentially, this case, so far, the judiciary has more or less not agreed with their attempts to get a quick resolution to this matter, right? Now, that may or may not be an indicator of the legal standing that the law enforcement operations are under, or it could just be that, well, so far, the legal team of the Hadids have not necessarily proven that the state has gone beyond their authority and beyond the law. That doesn't necessarily mean that they might not find a way to potentially get a legal argument to put this all to bed. The thing is, now it's not just about whatever case and accusations that they're under. It's also about the state of emergency. What's interesting is, depending on if the Hadids are successful, the implication it could have with regards to the state of emergency on a whole, now that they are pursuing this. The flip side to that is this. They are challenging their detention, right, with the tribunal, submitting an appeal to the SOE tribunal. However, the tribunal can only submit their recommendations to the Homeland Security Minister, Roger Alexander. They are not binding, which means this is the report, they can be either accepted or rejected by the minister, which is interesting. Now, let's not forget the minister said this wonderful statement when speaking about the arrest of the Hadids. Let me say again one more time, no government minister can instruct anyone to take out a PDO for anybody. It doesn't work like that, and if that's your information, you were highly misled. The problem is, and while I understand that on some level that's supposed to be either the spirit of the law, and that's supposed to be how it's supposed to be when you look at it in practice, or at least if it's done potentially, practice a certain way. Here's a report, and I believe this is taken, I don't know if this was edited in any way by the writer of this article, but here's the report. The couple lost their bid to secure their freedom on Tuesday before Justice Sri Prasad, who rejected their application to be released pending the determination of a judicial review lawsuit over preventative detention orders issued against them. The judge found that the couple's lawyer, led by Senior Counsel Douglas Mendez, failed to prove irregularities in the preventative detention orders issued by Homeland Security Minister Alexander. Now, is this one of those things where the police say, give them a PDO, and the minister has to write it out? But then why is it that the tribunal, apparently, at least the report says, the minister could accept or reject the recommendations by the tribunal with regard to the SOE tribunal and the preventative detention orders? The implication of how we understand PDOs to be, because as far as I'm aware, the minister signs off on all of it, is that it can't happen without his say-so, which potentially means his statement that no minister can instruct. And then at what point now is the police coming to you with evidence and you authorizing it? At what point is that blurred with the concept, the statement, the idea of instructing? Because the statement that the minister gave is trying to make it seem as though he is independent of the process or the process is independent of him. But the way how the case is playing out, the tribunal apparently makes recommendations to him. The PDOs are issued by him. But of course, it's not just the tribunal. They also have a judicial review against the PDOs. And if their judicial review against the PDOs are successful, if they find a legal argument that is successful, it might have wide implications on all PDOs. And then more importantly, and this might be well into the future, and we might forget most of what's going on, and we might no longer care. Except it might be like 2011 all over again, where we still have lawsuits coming down the pipe. We still have six-figure payouts, and maybe it might be higher in this case because the SOE is more extensive, the PDOs have been for longer. Maybe it's seven-figure payouts this time. We have not seen anything to give us confidence that that can't happen again. However, so far, the Hadiths have not necessarily been successful, at least with the rulings that they have managed to get so far. Now, one of the questions is, are we going to get a quick trial? Because one of the ways, if a slow trial or delays could be an indicator, could be, do I say it again to emphasize the point? Could be an indicator that the state's investigations has too many holes in it. And politically speaking, if this is above board, as much as possible without potentially prejudicing the proceedings, you would want this result sooner rather than later. Because a quicker result, once everything is above board, once, there's no technicality, there's no accusation of any miscarriage of justice, there's no room for any of that. The faster you could get this done, whatever the investigation, into charges, into trial, into potentially convictions, if you have a legitimately strong case and you could get this done, you need it done as quickly as possible politically. And this is the sad part now. This is my opinion. But I think on some level the government has rolled a bit of a dice on this case. Because if it blows up in their face, the fallout could be extreme. And it could be varied. It could be diverse. From the ability of the police to actually conduct high-profile investigations, it's not like we haven't seen any of those fail in recent memory, to allegations of corruption with regards to the process, with regards to the criminal justice system, with regards to the investigation, if there was targeting, victimization, persecution going on. It doesn't have to actually happen. If the case blows up in the government's face, the accusations will be there, even if nothing can be proven, even if it is nowhere close to any sort of actual factual truth. The perception will be there, hanging over their heads until the end of time. That will be their legacy. I mean, somebody asked it best, we care about white-collar crime? Why can't we seemingly get a proper resolution to Piarco? I mean, it was a Miami court where some of these things, were happening, not so? And everybody assumes that the UNC loves Miami. Don't ask me to connect those dots. If you can't, well, that's unfortunate for you. So, and I think it's not that I disagree with Karen. I actually agree with her in this sense. You are the first government going after the perceived corrupt, wealthy elites, and we're complaining about it. Now, she's saying that we shouldn't complain about it, and on some level, I understand why she says that. But I think it's a case where it's not the public just being inconsistent and unfair. It's the public being pushed too far, too fast, to accept too many things that are difficult for them to accept. And ironically, what should have been easy to accept, at least to some extent, I won't agree Listen, you could be all the murderous gangster you want. I'm not going to agree for you to be in a cell with no bed, no mattress, no toilet. You have to crap in a bucket or in a hole in the ground. I'm not going to agree with that. Now, I don't know how true that is. If it is true, it doesn't matter who you are. I'm not going to agree with it. If you want to say, Sean, why are you defending criminals? I don't care, because one day, who knows, I might do something to be arrested. I don't know. I might speed, or I might have a lapse in judgment, cause an accident, or I might just be caught up in something that had nothing to do with me. But the police have to sort it out. And until they do, I'm arrested. And I might end up in horrible conditions, which would be even worse if I actually have no liability over the proceedings whatsoever. And I would have wished that someone advocated for the conditions to be humane enough at the very least. It doesn't have to be the Ritz. It just has to be relatively clean and relatively functional and practical. That's all. Working toilets, a bed. It doesn't have to be the most comfortable bed. So we have all of this involved. Now, again, it could be Nancy stories by their lawyers, although lies like this should be easily refuted if they are lies. But it's pushing us too fast, too far, too soon, back to back to back. Now you have the whole situation with Christmas lists, and the minister is treating, I think the minister is treating the situation. Look, I understand it came about from the previous administration. If you want to drop it, just drop it. If you don't want to take the situation seriously, don't take it seriously. But the attitude of the Minister of Homeland Security at times is rather unprofessional. It's one thing to you and some opposition MP go into a shouting match over some nonsense. You all want to be school children together, fight like school kids together, fine. Whatever, right? You're all in Parliament, I'm not in Parliament. At some point, you all do what you want. I'm not there, right? Embarrass yourself in front of the staff and the people in the audience chamber all you want and on national television. That's not my problem. But when you're doing this now with a foreign national who has a high-profile case in international press, buddy, please, please, stop proving that the government doesn't care about tourism. Please. What should be good news is that there's a report on a drop in active gangs in the Northern Division. The problem is that in and of itself doesn't mean anything to me. Particularly now, although it feels as though the police being led by Senior Superintendent Sherma Mayer-Wilson, it seems as though she's trying her best, her police are doing their best, they're actively engaged in different programs and strategies and tactics on the ground, not just hard measures, but soft measures as well. I could be, I don't know how effective everything is, but at some point now, unfortunately, I have a hard time assessing the situation, because the people above her has done such a good job of turning the whole institution that is the TTPS into a public mess. More importantly, just because the number of gangs have dropped doesn't necessarily mean anything. One of the issues that you have to be concerned about in the criminal underworld is, yeah, there might be less gangs, there might be less cartels. It could be because there are less gangsters. It could be because there's less illegal money, there's less drug smuggling, there's less murders, or it could be because criminals are consolidating. I mean, we've already had instances where the government says, well, oh, they're making a syndicate to threaten the government. The protesters are coming out to say that the gang should unite against the government. Well, I thought they already made a syndicate. No, now they're uniting. And now this is another thing where, listen, those calls went out, right, into the public. Ironically, I don't know if that individual was arrested. Oh, well. But those calls went out into the public. Maybe the gangs are consolidating and that's why they went from 16 to 11. I don't know. This is natural human behavior, by the way. You have situations where you have different entities, you compete for a while, and then whether the competition between each other has been two-faced or they perceive to have an outside threat to them, you consolidate in order to try to strengthen with whoever remains, to better organize, to come together so that they have a more united front and potentially would be stronger than if they were apart. And that's obviously not a good thing. You know, imagine if all of the drug trade around the world was, there's only one cartel left, but they control all the drug trade. All of it. I mean, that's how you get people like Escobar and the like, right? When individuals get too powerful, control too much. So the thing is, the police make this pronouncement, there's limited context around it, right? Now they are seeing, I guess, a reduction in gang activity, but this is when you catch-22 some analysis. To what extent is their information the most accurate, guaranteed to be the full picture, the full truth? We don't know. And unfortunately, given the environment that she is now operating in, the senior soup, I no longer have the emotional capacity to just give the TTPS the benefit of the doubt that, A, they are telling me the full truth. I don't, because I've been burned too much over the last 6 months. And if you don't like it, it's not that I want to feel this way. I'm uncomfortable in this situation, but like with regards to the politics, there's too many negatives. There's too many negatives, and there's not enough proof of positives. And yes, I'm the guy that says most police officers are not corrupt. Unfortunately, it doesn't have to be intentional for things to go off the rails. Policing is a complex thing, and you only need a couple bad apples here and there to destabilize or disrupt the whole operation. And unfortunately, this is where, again, when you want to defiantly say no to body cameras, erode public trust and confidence, erode public goodwill, have a controversial shooting happen, conduct controversial arrests, and then expect the public to accept you. And one of the things I find interesting is, and maybe this is a good sign because she's saying that the citizens in her area are cooperating with the police in some way, right? They have a certain level of engagement with the community. They're getting information from the community, participation in their programs, etc., etc. But we don't actually know what the numbers are. We don't actually know what the full picture is. So we're supposed to give it the benefit of the doubt, but it's hard in this environment, which is unfortunate because it seems as though they had a press conference where they said mostly all the right things. They just, if they could have given us more detail on some of the things, they obviously can't, but if they could have given us more detail to cement what it is that they have to say, to help give more weight to what it is they have to say. But given the current environment, and this is the uphill battle now the police are going to have to climb. And if the communities that she's protecting is willing to believe in her, trust in her and her officers, the officers under her command, great. I'm not saying don't, but I'm not there, so I don't know how they operate, you know, on an individual basis, or at least I don't do enough to have to interact with police. I don't break the law, I don't speed, I don't have tickets, you know, I don't get into accidents that often. I have a media ambassador, he can't necessarily speak to this division. So I don't have first-hand experience. I don't know how they treat with various crimes. I don't know how they communicate to the community. I don't. So it's difficult for me to assess. And the great looming specter of what's been going on for the last 6 months. it's hard now to come out from under that. On some level, maybe we and all as the public should be trying, not just saying the police have to rehabilitate the image, but we ourselves should be trying to not necessarily let that override all of our judgment. But it's hard. It's hard. Of course, there's also the fact that the I think it's the Seamen and Waterfront Workers Trade Union. Now, apparently, I think there's a video or photos of Mr. Anisett speaking to police before they arrested Alyssa Phillips, telling police that he invited them. On the scene. He said they were right behind him. And it brings into question the version of events by the police that they inquired with the unions if they were authorized to be there, and they were told no. I don't know if it was some creative interpretation on behalf of the police or some creative wordplay on behalf of Mr. Anisett. So I don't know who's necessarily at fault. I don't know if it's a miscommunication, misunderstanding between the two parties involved in that conversation, but I'm left, unfortunately, with more questions. And again, it's hard to take what the police say, at least in certain situations, at their word anymore. And the way how some police officers operate, it's not making it any easier. So they have secured senior counsel and handed over all relevant information that they could generate to that lawyer who will advise them on what comes next. All witnesses, everybody has to make statements, and he will do the evaluation and determine the way forward. That's a quote. At this time, I prefer not to mention who the senior counsel is, but it is a well-known senior counsel, and this is for obvious reasons. I'm not entirely sure why the reasons are obvious. What is Mr. Anisett implying with that statement? And this is the sad reality. The more things goes on in this manner, it doesn't have to be true, but without proper clarification, the speculation, the suspicion, the assumptions will continue. And the difference between now and before is that I think we are having discussions on more serious levels, more frequently, more serious accusations than before. And the PNM got a lot of serious accusations, a lot of it based on speculation, technically, or rumor, but still, they got a fair amount of it throughout the years. Talking points been on the air, and I feel as though we're hitting a new level of how serious it is, the severity, the implications of what people are saying, what people are believing, what people are perceiving. And given that we are a happy-go-lucky society, how will we come out with this scenario? How will we come out on the other side? Do we have the tools as a society, as a nation, as a culture to treat with this without having to go through some interesting growing pains? Because I'm not entirely sure if we've ever had a situation quite like this in our history. Maybe we have. And you might say, well, we had a coup. You can't get worse than that. It's not about the severity of the situation, but the specific details of how we are going to be challenged. And if we have the experience, the judgment, the tools, if we know or if we could figure out as quickly as possible how to meet those challenges, hopefully overcome them and not be overwhelmed by them. And it doesn't have to be a coup to overwhelm you. It doesn't have to be civil unrest leading to violence to overwhelm you. It could just be a situation getting out of hand. And if you always knew what the triggers would be to cause something like that, then we would never end up in those pitfalls, in those traps. But usually you don't see it coming. You see hints, you see symptoms, you see maybe clues to indicate, but you don't actually see it spelled out for you. Avoid this path because this path is bad. Take that path is safe. It's not spelled out for you like that. It's not dissimilar to parenting. There's no book on parenting. Well, on some level, there's no book on governance. You can get books on leadership, but they're all based on the individual experience and what worked for them in the circumstances they found themselves in at the time. You could coach leadership. You can't just teach it. And then you have to try to apply other people's lessons on your unique situation, on your unique culture, on your unique society, and the circumstances upon which that society is either confined by or chooses to operate within. So, you're upset with the police, you could get arrested. That is one implication. Not that I think it's quite that bad, but that is technically the direction that arrest was in. You protest against law enforcement, you could be arrested. Again, not necessarily achieving anything with the arrest, but potentially, I've seen social media statuses and posts making yourself look worse. But, hey, you know better, obviously. It is so important to arrest Alyssa Phillips again, because she's not protesting against a UNC councilman that crossed the floor, so obviously she's doing something unethical. You shoot someone with his hands up. Speaks for itself. 19 bullets. And then without any sort of reasonable groundwork, any sign of leadership, any sort of management of expectations, you then charge the other, the survivor in the shooting with unintentional homicide, and allowing the public to have to figure out those emotions on their own, and then being upset when you don't like where their conclusions land on. Notice I didn't say that she was innocent. I said you did nothing to prepare the public for the version of the events that you wanted them to accept. But you did so on the cheap. You just assumed that because you said it, it would be accepted. Why? I have no idea. San Fernando line caller, good morning, you're on here. Morning, caller.
Morning, Sean.
Morning, morning.
Sean, listen to Karen yesterday, trying to put a position where the DPP will use what is presented to him to make a determination on whether or not to charge people.
Mm-hmm.
And in particular with this case with Joshua Samaru's girlfriend. And I understand what Karen was trying to do. However, I am in the position that you are in, and let me tell you why. I have been in this town longer than you,
mm-hmm.
much longer than you.
Mm-hmm.
I have gone to court for jury service several times over my lifetime. Several times. I have sat in the court and listened to cases, both in the magistrate's court and in the high court. And I have seen where this is presented that is that the police, and a lot of cases, at least where I have been in the court, and then some of it, even in the newspaper, you have over the years you have read some that evidence presented was false. So I find myself in a similar situation like you, because I know, as a what the Lieutenant Stitchy would say, Sam, you see what the police can do? So my mistrust in the police service is well founded with respect to evidence gathering and presenting information. So, and on top of this, we also have a video to deal with, which is where the public has issue. And this is where we need to, what you call it, Police Complaints Authority really needs to have proper investigative powers. Because, you see, they took all this time and now put evidence, after all this month, put evidence in the DPP's hand to try and charge Samuel's girlfriend. However, nothing of those investigation of those police officers. And this is where the Complaints Authority comes in. They need more teeth in this authority to deal with the situations like this. I am waiting to see with bated breath, to see the preventative detention order for the Hadids. I'm waiting to read it to see what is put inside of there, because it hasn't published as yet.
I think there were reports.
Because it was that order was seemingly issued around on the 24th. You see, they have printed orders up to the 27th, but I haven't seen that one printed as yet. Although, and I've seen that they are now, this is ramping up because British lawyers, I see 2 British lawyers have been admitted to practice in Trinidad and Tobago for this particular case. I'm not sure if it's for which side it's for, if it's for the prosecution side or for the defense. The defense side.
The defense.
2 have been appointed and have been given permission to practice as of the 30th of this month. 30th of last month. So the situation that you find yourself in, and I find myself in, is well grounded in history in Trinidad and Tobago. I'm telling you, the police service, the mistrust in the police service is well founded. Have a good day, Sean.
Thank you, caller. I will say this too. I don't think Karen was trying to say that the charges were valid or not valid. I am not sure. I am under the impression that it's not up to the DPP to determine the validity of the evidence. And I think that is what the trial is for. Unfortunately, I don't know if he has the capacity to assess evidence on that level, right? The issue of potential false or fake evidence, I did think about. I didn't necessarily want to speculate about it because I'm sure people already are. And I don't know, so I'm not going to necessarily talk about it. I understand where you're coming from. My thing is, I am under the impression that the DPP didn't really have that subjectivity, that leeway at this stage, right? And depending, now we'll see what happens when the evidence comes out. I know that there's some members of the public who assume that, once the police don't have great evidence, this might be a horrible loss. And they're assuming that the state is going to lose the case off the bat. We don't know what the evidence is, so, and then of course there is that question, did they pad the stats, so to speak? But I think what Karen's point was is that the blame on the DPP, we need to kind of understand the position he was in. I don't think he had a lot of room to maneuver on this. And the flip side, of course, is I could understand when, because I myself, I'm kind of wondering, even as I'm saying it, you know, but why not? You know, is that a flaw in the system? Who knows? Because on some level, as cultures progress, perhaps, and mindsets and the sophistication of how we operate progresses, you know, just as time goes on, perhaps practices from the past are no longer sufficient and they have to adjust. And maybe this is one of those times. But I don't think the DPP is part of any sort of bad faith conspiracy. I think that's the long and short. Shagona Sunny Line caller, good morning. You on the air?
Yeah, good morning, Sean. You know, what I noticed is that, you know, a lot of people like on the ground not weighing into the this Hadid matter so much, right? And simply because, unlike the Joshua Samaru thing, we didn't see no official evidence or whatever, right?
Mm-hmm.
So we don't have enough information as to what transpired, right? What we only hope is not being treated like the Joshua Samaru case, and that the police use the proper intelligence and so on to gather the evidence and so on. Because I said that because at the end of the day, they have a legal price to pay, a financial price to pay, and a political price to pay if this doesn't go in their favor and if they didn't handle it properly.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
The next thing I want to raise, and you know, is good this Joshua Samaru thing and this Alicia Phillip thing. Because Alicia Phillip was a creature of the Joshua Samaru thing. We will not have this Alicia Phillip situation if we did not the Joshua Samaru situation. Right? But they said something there just now in relation to the polls and the arrest of the Labor Day function. And I was watching a whole scenario, and as they talk about it, it said prompt me to call, right? So two things to be true at the same time, you know. You're saying that Mr. Anis, let's say he had footage where he was telling them that he invited her.
No, I saw.
Saying that
I saw
they
either
had information that
a photo or footage of him speaking to police. Now maybe
it
was misattributed and it wasn't at Labor Day.
Hello, Sean?
Sorry. Go ahead, caller. Go ahead. Go ahead.
Right. Okay. Yeah. So what I noticed, I was a general council member of the union, OWT in specific, for over 20 years. I've been going to Labor Day celebrations for over 30 years, right? And what I was mentioning, I never seen police presence at a Labor Day march to the scale of what we saw there now, the last Labor Day, right? You gotta go through the whole march, cut down junction, straight down the Charlie King Junction, and you'll hardly see a police presence or police officer thing like that down there, right?
Mm-hmm.
So it's something you said just now, and it prompted me to think this perspective on this. But remember, the labor movement is not a united thing, you know. Right now is a three-headed monster, you know.
Right.
We have Fighton, Jatam, and Natuk, right?
Mm-hmm.
And every time when most of this happen, like what I'm observing is when the PNM in power, the Labour Union united. When the UNC in power, they fragmented. Because obviously, some of the labor movement thing hitch the wagon, you know, with the UNC. Right? So I was thinking, and you mentioned something there. Why police come out with riot gear and all kind of stuff and things like that to arrest me? No, they were nothing all the resources and just to do that. Right? But they are pushing a wedge within the trade union movement. Because this happened already, you know. where the kind of acrimony in the Labor Day movement because of that division, and that's how fight and all these things emerged. At one point, they were so fragmented and so acrimonious that they had Labor Day celebrations in Faizabad and Labor Day celebrations in Port of Spain. I never remember that. Right? So suppose they figure that the division is so deep now that it will be acrimonious in Faizabad. So that one union will be attacking the next union. And so to prevent that now, they have the riot police and then present the thing that, right? Mm-hmm. And so if the police favor, if they're favoring one union over the next, if I talk to people who the union are favoring the government, and you ask them, did you all invite Alicia Seeley? They will say, no, we didn't invite she. And the other faction say, yes, we invite she. You see? So that's something the trade union movement has looked at, that division. Right? Locked on and listening, right? Thank you for the contribution, Sean.
No problem, caller. Now, I mean, I didn't even necessarily think that it was a situation where the different organizers might have given different vision of events. All I did what I said immediately when I spoke first on the incident, left room for that to be interpreted, because it wasn't clear if Mr. Anisette was the people who the police spoke to. Now, I saw either video or photos of what is claimed to be the police speaking to Mr. Anisette before or at the time when Ms. Phillips was arrested. Technically speaking, that might be, the internet has examples of when you take media files out of context, photos or videos, and you claim it to be during a period or during an event, and it was from some other time period in the past or whatever, right? To fool people. So technically that could happen, but I'm going with the assumption that what I saw was genuine. Because again, Ms. Anisette said she was right behind him. But I don't know if he himself confirmed that he told police directly in the moment, I invited her, right? But here's the thing, the concept of division in labor doesn't surprise me, because at the end of the day, the current administration is not treating labor unions consistently or equally. Some get 10%, others don't. And we could move on from there. And when you have the union, our current minister, who was formerly the leader of, calling him out on his behavior or lack of presence in a situation that he was so passionate about just a year ago. And maybe you're right, there's something to labor not being united in the UNC. Correction, the two lawyers, Mr. San Fernando, I was wrong. I don't know if you heard me, but I said they were here for the defense. No, it seems as though they're here for the state, which is an interesting situation. And I'll speak about that after we have a caller from Marima. We'll take the caller next. Caller, good morning, you're on here. Caller? Morning.
Hi, morning, Sean.
Morning.
Yeah, good morning. Now, you are a grounded person, you know. I see, my phone giving me trouble. I don't know if you're hearing me.
Yeah?
Yeah, my phone giving me a little trouble this morning. Now, you are a grounded person, right? You come out in the morning, come and you do your work very efficiently, an excellent job, well done. When I sit down and I listen to you, I say, look at that. This young man, you have all the way to go. You understand? So don't think about when you might be where you talk about or you think. No, you are grounded and you have all the abilities, right? So you won't be in that predicament. So don't think about it. Just drink a little water. Right? Yeah, but I don't want to go on with the summary thing, eh? Mm-hmm. But hear what I want to say. You know what I want to say this morning? I want to say that Christmas list. When I saw him at a ledger, when I saw this man come out and talk, imagine this. The government told the man, they said, You is not to come back in this country. They stop the man from coming here. But yet still, you see, now we have a matter in this month, we have a matter. And you know what's going on? He had to come back. The man feel like a wreck. When I watch that man, I say, oh God, like all the powers in that man just leave him. You understand? You have to come back. They didn't want you here, but yet still you have to come back. And if you don't come back, they might hold you and they might charge you. I mean, to me, that don't make sense at all. That don't make sense. And next thing, I want to commend the police. You see, when officers do good, you have to give them thumbs up. And yesterday, it alleges, I had to say alleges, because I wasn't there. I saw on the news that something had happened in Tobago, right? Some stabbing had taken place in Tobago and they call person, right? And it alleges that the person left the island and come here, travel on the ferry and come here. And the police from over there, I don't know how that happened, but they apprehend him when he came, when the ferry stopped here, and the people started to embark the ferry to come out. They apprehend the man. That was very good. So I had to commend the police for that. Thumbs up for the officers and them. Very good job. Well done. That is what we have to commend the police. When they do good, we have to give them thumbs up. And when they laugh, you wouldn't like it too much. You ain't giving them no thumbs up all the time. But I want to say, good job, well done. And Sean, drink a little water, because carrying on this program is a hectic one. And we know you have the ability, the stamina to go on. And you will keep on going on by strength after strength. Thank you very much. Keep on going on. Good job. Well done as always. Thank you.
Thank you, caller. I'll say this. I don't feel like I was quite that efficient this morning, to be honest. But I appreciate the call. And it's not about the praise. I know I'm so happy to get praise. But rather, if someone says such things about you, then on some level, in my mind, it's a sign of not necessarily that you're doing something right, but rather we'll look at the responsibility, even if it's just to this one viewer. And on some level, I think on some level I'm accomplishing what I hoped Talking Point would accomplish, at least for some of the viewers, for some of the callers. And I guess now the thing is, all I could do is have conversations. And I'm hoping the conversations spark enough thought and dialogue. I don't think I'm doing enough to necessarily push change on my own. I'm going to just take Trinidad and Tobago with my own two hands and push it to where it needs to be with my own strength. I think what I do is whatever little strength I have to be willing to engage in conversations. And then those conversations now inspire other people to maybe think through things more carefully, do their own research, engage more with the situation. And then maybe if enough of us do that, then we collectively could get where the country would be in a better place. Caller, you're right. In that situation, the police deserve all the praise in the world, because now there's no subjectivity there. You know, I don't have to worry about what might be or might not be. I understand, Mr. Sanfano. Don't think I don't disagree with you with your suspicions, right? Don't think I don't disagree with you with your suspicions. But there are suspicions, technically, haven't had case. But in this situation, there's no, limited information, lack of context, not a full picture. There is a guy did a crime, and the police intercepted him. Kudos to that. Have no fault with that. Dabadi on the line, call good morning on here.
I shouldn't pleasant and coming on the end of that young lady who gave you all those kudos. I want to actually endorse it too. Oh, and pleasant morning to San Fernando. Sean, with respect to the blogger who the young lady was speaking about,
yeah,
he has no choice coming and face trial, and I don't know why they can't do it virtually. But the minister has him in a predicament whereby he can come and representation, or even he could have somebody here represent him. He could have counsel represent him here. But what the minister is saying, if he comes and he's found guilty, then they will have to jail him. And I can't see why you have to go to the point of having to have a conviction and say that you have to serve time for that offense. So, and we should be encouraging persons to come to the country. And in my opinion, I haven't seen anything that he has done that is wrong, quote unquote wrong. Sean, I want to take 1 second to ask you a question personally here. I like your program. You know, I've been following you and your colleague for years. I want to say for years, maybe about 2 years or more. I don't know how long the program started.
Yeah.
However, can you deal with an issue politically without comparing another party? I need to ask you this straightforward. I see no reason why you can't deal with an issue and say, okay, the UNC, I'm giving you kudos for this because I like the way you did an excellent budget. Why do you have to do a comparison to a budget that the PNM did? I'm not saying I can't understand. I don't know if you are scared that you would offend the current government or the current party in power, or I'm trying to figure out the reason why, as a presenter, if all the issues you deal with, that you must do a comparison with another party. Nothing is wrong with a comparison, hear me well, but I do not see any reason why you have to at all times, and I'm listening to you all morning, and each and every issue that you rose, if it's crime, the manner in which crime was handled, you do a comparison to under the PNM. If it's dealing with Balize House, you probably did a comparison with the UNC. And basically that is it. So I'm locked on and listening. I'm I would say one of your most favorite callers, because I've been following your program. I don't do without listening to your program in the morning. I think it's an excellent program. But I just need you, if you could answer that question for me, please. Thanks. I'm locked on and listening.
Sure. Ironically, there's two parts to the answer. One is what I started off with at the beginning of the show. The circumstances are different. I didn't necessarily have years of commentary on a UNC administration to compare the PNM to, right? So that's one thing. That's why it is different, because the practical circumstances, I as a commentator, in my knowledge base, my experience, and my record, because I'm not just speaking to what I think was the case, I am speaking to what I said when XYZ happened. And the reason why I do that is a couple of things. One is, in general, I saw this on some level under when I was commenting when the PNM were in power, from almost the very beginning. So I did compare, but it wasn't quite the same comparison as now, but I did compare even back then. Because people, to some extent, want to say that I'm biased for whoever I am not criticizing in the moment. I'm biased against them, and I'm biased for the other party. And I could be criticizing the PNM for Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, say something bad about the UNC Thursday, and then people will say, oh, well, you're against the UNC. But I criticize the PNM for the 3 days prior, right? Because at the time, the news stories, it wasn't quite so heavy. So there was more room to be, you know, some good things, some bad things. So say the news that week had a lot of negative PNM stories. I'll say that for most of the week, comment on those negative stories most of the week. And then somebody in the UNC did something that I criticized on Thursday, and all of a sudden I'm a PNMite and I'm against UNC. So I do it to show consistency, right? I do it because now after the election, you had a lot of people, why are you complaining about the government? Why are you complaining about the government? I'm like, hold on. I use the same criteria, the same process, the same thought process, the same standards under the PNM. So I'm trying to show it's consistent. I'm consistent with what I said with the past administration. Doesn't matter to me, ketchup or mustard. I'll call it out the same way. The same way that I see it. I'll say it how I see it. I'm not gonna all of a sudden change, you know. The difference is I have more information to try to support my position. So I'm also looking at, well, look, similar things under the PNM, it was bad, things under the UNC, bad. But it's a lot of it comes down to, and this is why the consistency matters, because the argument against criticism against the government is that, well, the PNM was awful. Well, the PNM was awful, so the UNC is not awful because the PNM was awful. We don't want to hear from the PNM because the PNM was awful. The PNM did nothing about crime. Don't talk about the government not having a crime. PNM didn't have a crime plan. And I'm pointing out the fact that, look, two wrongs don't make a right. And I'm willing to say, call out, because essentially people are looking at the opposition trying to call out the government, saying they're being hypocritical. And they assume if I am calling out the government, I am pro-opposition. If I'm calling out the UNC, I'm pro-PNM. So on some level, I'm trying to kind of preempt all of those arguments that have been thrown at me in the past, right? I understand that it's going to make PNM supporters, and I'm not saying that Mr. Dabidi is some diehard PNM sycophant that was always supporting them and making excuses for them. But that is the party that he has, to my understanding, supported throughout his life. And whether he agrees or disagrees with the incumbents, he doesn't necessarily want to see unnecessarily flack to his party. The key word is says unnecessary. That's why I believe you asked me that question, right? It's not as though he's going to complain if I have justifiable criticisms, but perhaps now it seems excessive. Why do I have to lump in the PNM with the UNC? Part of it is to show that the arguments are not, it's not unique. It's not about one party. And then we could trace the roots to not the corruption of any one party, but the political environment and how the voters impact the decisions of politicians. But that's part of it. But I think on some level, if I have to be truthful, that might be the lesser part. The major part is because what is going to be thrown at me is not, you're wrong about criticizing the government because of this reason, that reason, and the other reason. No, I'm wrong because, well, the PNM was bad, and this government not as bad. Or the PNM did nothing about it, so this government trying to do nothing, so accept it. Or something along those lines, which I have difficulty accepting, because again, two wrongs don't make a right. So that's why, and yes, on some level, I also do it to kind of show that I'm not trying to bash the government for the sake of bashing the government, right? So unfortunately, that's how I am trying to be balanced. But I think it's warranted enough. I think it's fair. And I do also try to point out that people are treating Penelope Beckles, I think, unfairly. They are expecting her to fail because she is not conforming to what they believe a political leader should be, which I mentioned earlier on this week or last week, I can't remember when. I find it's very interesting and potentially inconsistent when the thing that they want political leaders to be is also the thing they criticize political leaders the most for. Right? Because we didn't like it when Dr. Rowley was going too far with his aggressive statements and his aggressive positions and how he would talk to the media. But because Penelope Beckles doesn't do it, that's a problem. I have sympathy for politicians in situations like that where they are literally getting contradicting messages. So, look, it is what it is. And probably what will happen is, if and when the PNM wins another election and I'm on the air, it could be 5 years from now, 10 years from now, I will probably continue the practice, whereas if a PNM government does something wrong, I will compare it to situations that happen under the UNC. Also note that on some level, one of the comparisons is the fact that it took some time for the PNM to reach a certain point where the news was this negative. One reasons also why I compare it, and I think this can't be discounted, is the fact that not only are there legitimate similarities, but rather how a lot of the excessive behavior, from my point of view, is happening so early on in this administration. There was no build to it. There was no stumbling and failing. And it's not as though the PNM had a better budgetary position. Maybe a little bit better. COVID didn't happen yet when they now came in, right? And they didn't have quite so much debt. But still, the speed running, and this is something that was told to me that I didn't necessarily want to admit, but the speed running by this government as compared to the previous PNM administration to get to the point where you're going to have a lot of negative sentiments is rather impressive. I have to say, not impressive in a good way. Not in a good way. All right. With regards to the PCA, here's the thing. And I don't know what Penelope Beckers will do if given a chance, so I won't speculate on that. We know that technically speaking, the previous government didn't do it. I would argue the crime situation, while the murder rate was worse, the crime situation was different. Not saying it was better, but it was different. The situation with the police and trust in the police is worse now. So the calls for the PCA are concretized now, or have a lot more weight, a lot more meaning now for them to have more powers than before. Before it was more like, well, we're not sure, do we trust? And I myself was saying, you know, we need to trust. We can't just mistrust all the police. But now the leadership, it got worse, first of all. Remember, Gary Griffith was the commissioner when Talking Point started. Then we had McDonald Jacobs. And then things started to get bad after McDonald Jacobs, right? I'll make a bet that the current government will never, and dare I say, dare not increase the powers of the PCA in any significant way. In any significant way. If they do, I'll be surprised. I'll lose the bet. I'll be incredibly surprised if they do. Now, it could be like procurement legislation, where they do it, but it doesn't actually mean anything because it's so watered down, it might as well be useless, right? I mean, we'll see how effective it is maybe with this whole HDC $3.4 billion project that was scrapped. You could also look at there was the gambling legislation, and a whole host of other regulatory pieces of legislation which just fell apart. But they were enacted on simple majorities, and they don't really mean anything. I mean, look, even the Stand Your Ground law as a measure to help protect citizens, or help citizens protect themselves, rather, right? So part of it is, doesn't seem as though our legislative bodies, our policymakers, could figure out a way to effectively strengthen the law. The whole marijuana thing has been a fiasco. Digitizing the police is part of the reason why enforcement is inconsistent. That's been a fiasco. So will the PCAs get stronger powers? Given the fact that, one, they don't even give the footage that they have, the body camera footage to the PCA anyway. But then they defiantly decided, not reluctantly decided, not, well, we wish we had body cameras, but unfortunately we practically can't. No, they basically had a defiant justification. No, body cameras over body cameras. As though that's going to be what's going to cause the deficit to tip over the edge and bankrupt the country, right? Body cameras is going to bankrupt the country. Not the 10% to the PSA, not the $3 billion in back pay that you don't want to pay. Body cameras is going to bankrupt the Treasury. So you defiantly deny us that. Even if you had it, you won't give it to the PCA anyway. When you have that position, when you go on your record and say the issue with the video that shows police officers gunning down a man with his hands up is the fact that it was revealed to the public, not the fact that the public has questions about the police behavior in that moment. No, the bigger issue is the fact that it was released at all. That's wrong. What does that imply? You could fill in the blanks. When you have that, and this is not a member of the police service, this is a former member of the police service that doesn't understand that he's supposed to be the civilian oversight over the police service that's supposed to be advocating for the body cameras in order to protect the citizens as well as to protect the police officers themselves, because them 3 officers, if they were shot at or had a gun pointed at them, really would wish they had body cameras in that moment. But he's not doing his job. He's pretending to be senior commissioner. That's what he's doing. He's not being the civilian oversight, to be the voice of reason, to be the advocate for the population. He's being the advocate for the officers. That's nice. You're wasting my time. Why do we even have you? Except maybe if you want to say because the Prime Minister doesn't actually want to be present in her job, fine. In that environment, is the current government, do they dare give the PCA powers to investigate police that allegedly committed crimes or broke the law? Nope. No, they will not. They never will. If I'm proven wrong, I'll be happy to be wrong. But this is one of the few times where I'm more than willing to state things in absolute terms, because there's nothing in the track record of any political party that says that they're going to embolden another independent institution like the PCA, because everything we've seen, for the most part, is attempts to undermine independent officers, right? On some level, the independent senators, whether you like who appoints them or not, is supposed to be independent. They are now undermined with what could only be assumed to be baseless accusations. But no one is taking the Prime Minister to task for potentially disrupting public order by undermining the trust and confidence the people have in the independent senators as part of our legislative bodies, as one of the few ways we have a check on government excess. No one's talking about that. No. It's only if you threaten the government that is a threat to public order. But if you make accusations against the independent senators that you do nothing to follow through with, no, that's fine. That's normal. So the PCA will never get increased powers. Nobody wants to see that. They don't even want body cameras. They don't want video evidence of what police are doing. Why would they want an independent body outside of the control of the government and the police to oversee the police? No. The status quo, whatever you think the status quo is, apparently that is what they need it to be. That's what they like. Whatever you think it might be, apparently that's what it is that they want it to be. We get what we pay for. I'm over time, so first of all, thanks for the indulgence of our directors for letting me go over time. Thanks to the callers. I don't think we have any comments today, just to confirm. All right, let's take the comments quick. The PNM did not leave money in the treasury. They asked where the UNC gets any money. Yeah, it doesn't matter that the PNM didn't leave money. It's still a valid question. Let's just assume PNM stole boatloads of money. It's still a valid question because I asked it. Other people like me who are not PNM asked it. It's still a valid question. But also, the UNC did not leave money in the treasury when the PNM took power. And similar to how you should have been able to predict the state of the treasury before the election results, people were predicting the state of the treasury before the PNM won in 2015 or whenever, right? Money was not in the treasury then. So the root cause to all problems is poverty. A hungry man is an angry man. While I would not necessarily agree that to be 100% absolute true, there's a lot of truth in that statement, especially now. Especially now with regards to our crime, with regards to our unrest, and with regards to our lack of economic growth and the implications it has with regards to our revenue, because taxes are going to be reduced when our economy growth slows down and private business circulation in the economy slows down. and then we're going to have a harder time affording the things we need to afford, and it's going to be a vicious cycle. And on some level, while you might say it's an oversimplification, to some extent it is actually getting to the root. It might not be explaining fully, but it is getting to the root. Believe that, because we're turning into a nation of the poor. Our government is having to tax us in order to make up revenue shortfalls, but if we're getting poorer, where the tax money coming from? Meanwhile, education, national security, health, we can't actually meet all of the bills that these services require. All of the costs, all of the expenditures. And that was, yes, inherited, but the point is, what the PNM did on some level, you got what you got. Blaming the PNM ain't gonna change the financial situation now. The most important thing is not who did what when in the past, but how are you going to fix it now? What's the strategy for the now? And they don't have one. All right. Thanks to the commenter, thanks to the callers. This is talking about the WSND Connect after show, Michael Small. Listen, at the end of the day, we'll be better off if I was wrong most of the time. Unfortunately, that seemingly is not the case, at least most of the time. I'm not going to say we need to pick better politicians. I'm going to say we need to just have high expectations and do better. And perhaps the better politicians will then show up. But if we are not going to support them, why are they going to bother? Until then, until such a day, just reminding you, stay safe, remember your allegiance to the Republic and to each other. Don't forget, it's nice to be nice. I appreciate, Mr. Dabidi, your willingness to ask the question and doing so in a constructive way. Hopefully I answered you to your satisfaction. This is talking about the WSN. We'll see you tomorrow. Close on the beat. Bye-bye.
WESN